Hanbin, the lethal Iron King of Busan's shipping docks, has built an empire on visual dominance, believing that if he can see a threat, he can crush it. He moves through the city with the arrogance of a predator who owns the skyline. However, in the dark, salt-sprayed back alleys of the port, his eyes become his greatest liability. During a moment of near-fatal vulnerability near the Jigalki markets, he is saved by Minna, a blind girl who exists entirely in a world of sound and vibration. She doesn't just hear the city. She decodes the hidden intentions behind the crashing waves and industrial hum. By grabbing his arm and predicting an invisible strike, she shatters Hanbin's confidence in his own senses. He soon realizes that his maritime empire is a hall of mirrors, a visual lie constructed by his closest allies. To survive, the man who trusts nothing but his eyes must surrender his vision to a girl who sees the world through the rhythm of a heartbeat. Hanbin was a man who believed only in what he could see. In the coastal city of Busan, he was known as the Iron King, a title he earned by watching everything. From his high office overlooking the shipping docks, he used hundreds of cameras to track every crate, every truck, and every person on his payroll. To Hanbin, power was a visual game. If a man flinched, Hanbin saw it. If a rival moved a hand toward a pocket, Hanbin saw that, too. He often told his captains, the world belongs to those who keep their eyes open. Because he was so obsessed with watching, his security team was the best in the country. They used thermal goggles, motion sensors, and bright floodlights that turned night into day. Hanbin felt like a god sitting behind a wall of screens. He was so confident in his sight that he began to walk the streets alone at night, enjoying the way people looked away when his eyes met theirs. He thought he was the ultimate predator, and in his mind, a predator is never the one being hunted. But Hanbin's eyes were starting to bind to him. He was so focused on the bright neon signs and the flashing lights of the city that he forgot about the shadows. He didn't realize that his enemies had learned his habits. They knew he only looked for what was visible. They started moving in the quiet spaces, in the parts of the city where the cameras were fuzzy or the lights were broken. His security was perfect on paper, but it had one massive flaw: it was built for a man who didn't know how to listen. On this rainy Tuesday, the air in Busan was thick and salty. Hanbin walked through a narrow alley near the docks, his expensive shoes clicking on the wet stone. He looked left and right, checking the corners like he always did. Everything looked normal. The rain created a silver curtain that made the world look blurry but peaceful. He felt safe because his eyes didn't see any weapons. He didn't see the man dressed in black, standing perfectly still in a dark doorway, just 10 feet away. He didn't see the thin, silver blade that didn't catch any light. For the first time in his life, the Iron King was truly blind. He was walking straight into a trap, his eyes fixed on the empty path ahead. He was so sure of his power that he didn't even notice the small, quiet figure standing near a stack of wooden crates. He was about to find out that in the dark, being able to see is not the same thing as being safe. After the chaos in the alley, Hanbin could not sleep. The image of the silver blade missing his throat by an inch played over and over in his mind. He had gone back to his wall of security cameras, searching the footage for the girl who had saved him. He found her on a grainy screen near the fish market. She was sitting on a wooden stool, her face turned toward the ocean, perfectly still. He went to find her the next morning. The rain had stopped, leaving Busan smelling of salt and damp earth. He expected to find a woman with secret gadgets or hidden weapons, but as he approached, he saw only a girl in a simple sweater with clouded, sightless eyes. She didn't turn her head when he walked up, but she spoke before he could say a word. "Your left shoe is clicking," Minna said gently. "You have a small stone caught in the heel. It makes you sound heavy on one side." Hanbin stopped, stunned. He looked at his shoe, and sure enough, a tiny pebble was wedged in the rubber. How did you know it was me? We've never met. Minna smiled a little, though her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. I don't need to meet a person to know them. You breathe like a man who wants to own the air. You walk like the ground should thank you for stepping on it. Last night, you were the only person in that alley who didn't know death was coming. The killer was too quiet, but the air around him grew cold. I heard his jacket rub against the doorframe. I heard the metal of the knife whisper as he pulled it out. Hanbin sat down on a crate near her. He was a man who paid millions for the best technology. Yet this girl had seen more with her ears than his drones ever could. He realized then that she wasn't a psychic or a magician. She was simply a master of everything the world ignored. While he was busy looking at the bright lights, she was listening to the heartbeat of the city. They are going to come back for me, Hanbin admitted, his voice lower than usual. And I won't hear them coming. I need those ears of yours. Minna finally turned her face toward him. She couldn't see his expensive suit or his cold expression, but she seemed to look right through him. You want to use me as an alarm, she said. But the city is very loud, Hanbin. If you want me to help you, you have to learn to be quiet. Otherwise, you'll never hear the truth. Hanbin brought Minna to his private office at the top of a black glass tower. The room was cold and filled with glowing screens, but Minna didn't look at any of them. She stood in the center of the room, her head tilted slightly, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the distant honking of ships in the Busan harbor. Hanbin watched her closely. He still wasn't sure if he could trust her, so he decided to give her a test. He signaled for his guards to bring in a man named Jiro. Jiro had been Hanbin's delivery driver for 5 years, but lately, several shipments had gone missing. Hanbin's security team was sure Jiro was the thief. They had found suspicious maps in his truck and claimed his eyes looked guilty whenever he was questioned. Tell me the truth, Jiro, Hanbin said, his voice like cracking ice. Did you steal from me? Jiro fell to his knees, shaking. No, boss. I swear on my life. I've been loyal to you since the beginning. Please, you have to believe me. Hanbin looked at Minna. She was standing perfectly still, almost like a statue. She wasn't looking at Jiro's trembling hands or his messy clothes. She was focused on something else. The room became very quiet. It was so silent that Hanbin could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. After a long minute, Minna spoke. He is telling the truth, she said firmly. Hanbin frowned. How can you be sure? My best guards say he is lying. Look at him, he's shaking with fear. He is shaking because he is terrified of you, not because he is guilty, Minna explained. When a person lies, their heart skips a beat like a stone tripping in a stream. Their breathing becomes shallow and fast. But Jiro's heart is steady, even though it is beating very hard. And listen. She pointed to the floor. A tiny, rhythmic tap-tap-tap could be heard. It was the sound of sweat dripping from Jiro's forehead and hitting the polished floor. The salt in his sweat smells of honest panic, she continued. But there is someone else in this room whose breathing just changed. When I said Jiro was innocent, someone near the door held their breath for 2 seconds. Their hearts started to race. That is the sound of a person who is afraid of being caught. Hanbin spun around and looked at the guard standing by the door, the same guard who had accused Jiro. The guard's face turned pale. He tried to look brave, but his eyes darted around the room. Hanbin realized Minna had found the real traitor without even opening her eyes. He signaled for the guards to release Jiro and take the traitor away. You really do hear everything, Hanbin whispered, feeling a chill run down his spine. He realized that with Minna by his side, the shadows were no longer empty. In the days that followed, Hanbin's world began to feel like a house made of thin glass. He sat in his office, surrounded by the same high-tech monitors he had always trusted, but he no longer saw them as windows to the truth. Instead, they felt like bright stickers used to cover up cracks in the wall. With Minna sitting quietly in the corner, the silence of the room started to feel heavy and loud. He began to review old security footage, but this time, he didn't watch the action. He listened to Minna as she described the sounds that the cameras couldn't see. He played a video of a meeting from a month ago where his top captains had promised him their loyalty. On the screen, they looked perfect. They bowed low, their suits were sharp, and their faces were calm. Listen to the man on the right, Minna whispered as the audio played. His voice is too smooth. It sounds like a song that has been practiced 1,000 times. There is no real weight behind his words. Hanbin leaned in. He realized the man was his oldest friend, someone he had known since they were boys. For years, Hanbin had watched this man's smiles and thought they were real. Now, with Minna's help, he heard the tightness in the man's throat. He heard the way his friend's footsteps were slightly too fast, as if he was always in a hurry to leave the room. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Hanbin realized that his enemies had been performing for him. Because they knew he was always watching the cameras, they had learned how to act. They gave him visual proof of everything he wanted to see. They showed him fake delivery logs and staged photos of successful deals. They had built a beautiful, shining city of lies right in front of his eyes, and he had been too arrogant to notice. I've spent my whole life looking at a stage, Hanbin said, his voice trembling with anger. Everything I thought I owned is just a painting. My guards, my friends, even the people who work in my house, they are all just actors in a play I paid for. Minna nodded slowly. The eyes are easy to trick because they want to see beauty and order. But the ears only care about the truth of the vibration. You were so busy looking at the sun that you didn't notice the ground was being dug out from under your feet. Hanbin looked at his hands. He felt small. The Iron King was just a man trapped in a world of fake lights. He realized that if he wanted to survive, he had to stop looking at the screens and start listening to the shadows. His entire life was a lie, but for the first time, he was finally starting to understand the truth. Hanbin decided to do something he had never done before. He turned off all the lights. He ordered his guards to stay away and retreated to a quiet room deep inside his mansion where no sunlight could reach. He tied a thick, black silk cloth over his eyes, making sure not even a tiny bit of neon glow could get through. For the first time in his life, the Iron King was completely in the dark. At first, he felt a wave of pure panic. Without his eyes, he felt like he was falling into a deep, endless hole. He reached out his hands, but the air felt empty and cold. I can't do this, he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I feel like I've disappeared. You haven't disappeared, Minna's voice drifted through the darkness. She was sitting somewhere in the room, her voice steady and calm. The world is still here. You just stopped looking at the bright distractions. Breathe. Stop trying to find the walls with your eyes and start feeling them with your skin. Hanbin took a deep breath. He sat on the floor and tried to be as still as a stone. Slowly, the silence began to change. It wasn't actually silent at all. He began to notice the low, steady hum of the electricity running through the walls. He heard the distant, rhythmic ticking of a clock that he had never noticed before. He felt the tiny brush of air against his cheek as Minna moved her hand. What do you hear? She asked. I hear The house, Hanbin said. It sounds like it's breathing. Good, she replied. Now, listen past the house. Listen to the garden outside. Hanbin leaned his head back. He focused all his energy on his ears. He heard the soft pat-pat-pat of rain hitting the leaves. He heard a small frog croak near the pond and the way the wind whistled through the gaps in the window frame. He realized that the world was much bigger and busier than he had ever seen on his security monitors. As the hours passed, Hanbin's other senses began to wake up. He could smell the faint scent of old paper and the salty tang of the Busan sea air drifting in from the winds. He could feel the vibration of a heavy truck driving on a road far away. By the end of the day, he wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. He felt sharp and focused. He realized that his eyes had been like a loud television that was always left on, making it impossible to hear anything else. Now that the television was off, he was finally ready to face the ghosts in his empire. To celebrate his recovery from the alleyway attack, Hanbin invited his 3 most trusted captains to a private dinner at a seaside villa. The room was beautiful, filled with the smell of grilled fish and expensive wine. Large windows showed the lights of Busan sparkling on the water. To anyone watching, it looked like a friendly meeting between old allies. But under the table, Hanbin's hand was resting on Minna's arm. She sat beside him, dressed in a quiet silk dress, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. I am glad to see you are safe, Hanbin, said Dae-ho, his oldest friend and right-hand man. Dae-ho raised his glass with a wide, warm smile. The city was worried when we heard about the incident in the alley. Hanbin watched Dae-ho carefully. His eyes saw a loyal friend, but his mind was listening to Minna. He felt her fingers tighten slightly on his sleeve. She wasn't listening to the words, she was listening to the blood. As the dinner went on, the men talked about business and money. Every time Dae-ho spoke, Minna leaned in closer. She could hear the rhythmic thump-thump of his heart echoing against the back of his expensive chair. To a normal person, it sounded fine. But to Minna, there was a tiny, sharp snag in the rhythm, a little hitch that happened every time Hanbin mentioned the word traitor. The wine is excellent, Dae-ho said, but his voice had a tiny tremor that only a master of sound could catch. Minna leaned toward Hanbin's ear and whispered so gently that only he could hear. The man to your right. His heart is playing a trick. It skips a beat every time you look at him. And listen to his left hand. He is tapping his ring against the glass in a pattern of 3. It is a nervous tick he cannot control. Hanbin looked down. Dae-ho's hand was under the table, but the tiny clink-clink-clink of his ring against the stem of his glass was there, hidden by the sound of the waves outside. Hanbin felt a coldness spread across his chest. Dae-ho was the one who had stood by his side for 20 years. He was the one who had helped build the Iron King throne. You seem nervous, Dae-ho, Hanbin said, his voice as sharp as a razor. Is the salt from the sea making your heart race? The room went freezing cold. Dae-ho's smile didn't move, but the tapping of the ring stopped. Instantly. The silence that followed was terrifying. Minna felt the air in the room grow heavy with fear. She could hear Dae-ho's breath catch in his throat, a jagged, sharp sound like a saw on wood. I don't know what you mean, boss, Dae-ho replied, but his heartbeat was now a wild, drum-like roar that Minna could feel through the table. Hanbin didn't need to see a weapon to know the truth anymore. He didn't need a confession. The Iron King finally knew who the ghost in his empire was, and he knew it because of the one thing his friend couldn't hide, the rhythm of a guilty heart. The dinner did not end with a handshake. Before the main course was finished, the lights in the villa flickered and died. A heavy, metallic bang echoed from the hallway as the security doors were forced open. Hanbin's eyes searched the darkness, but even with his training, he could see nothing but blurry shapes. He felt a sudden, cold fear, but then he felt a warm hand grip of his own. "Follow me," Minna whispered. "They have goggles that let them see in the dark, but they don't know the shadows like I do. We have to move now." She led him out of the dining room and down a Secret Service staircase. They ended up in a massive, cold warehouse where shipping crates were stacked high like mountains. It was a place where Hanbin usually kept his cameras running 24 hours a day, but the power had been cut. The silence was terrifying. Suddenly, the red dots of laser sights danced across the walls. The silent war had begun. "There are 4 of them," Minna breathed into his ear. "One is behind the crates to the left. He is breathing heavily. Another is on the metal catwalk above us, his boots are making the steel groan ever so slightly. The other 2 are coming through the main door." Hanbin reached for his gun, but Minna pressed her hand against his chest. "No. If you shoot, they will see the flash of the gun. We must be like ghosts." She pulled him through a narrow gap between 2 crates. Hanbin realized he was completely dependent on her. He couldn't see the floor, but she knew exactly where every piece of trash and every loose pebble was. She led him with a strange, flowing grace. They moved in perfect silence while their hunter stomped through the dark, frustrated and confused. "Stop," she signaled, her hand tightening on his arm. A second later, a man walked past their hiding spot. Hanbin could smell the man's tobacco and hear the hum of his night vision goggles. Hanbin held his breath, his heart racing. Minna was as still as a statue. She waited until the man's footsteps faded before moving again. "They are closing in on the exit," Minna warned. "But there is a ventilation shaft in the back. The fan is broken, and it makes a clicking sound every 10 seconds. We can use that sound to hide our footsteps." Using the rhythmic click-clack of the broken fan, they timed their movements perfectly. To the assassins, the warehouse seemed empty. To Hanbin, it was a world of invisible maps and hidden paths. For the first time, he wasn't fighting with his fists or his eyes, he was fighting with his ears. They slipped out into the cold night air just as a flurry of bullets hit the crates where they had stood only moments before. They were alive, but the battle for Busan was far from over. The time had come for the final reckoning. Hanbin stood at the entrance of the Grand Mirror Gallery, a place his enemy, Dae-ho, had chosen for their last meeting. The room was a nightmare of lights and reflections. Thousands of mirrors lined the walls, floor, and ceiling. Bright, spinning spotlights danced across the glass, creating a dizzying maze of colors. To anyone who relied on their eyes, it was impossible to tell what was real and what was just a reflection. Dae-ho stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by a dozen armed men. "Welcome, Hanbin." Dae-ho's voice bounced off the glass, coming from everywhere at once. "You always love to watch. Now, I've given you 1,000 versions of me to look at. Which one will you shoot?" Hanbin looked around. He saw 1,000 Dae-hos pointing guns at 1,000 Hanbins. The flashing lights made his head spin. He felt the old panic rising, the feeling of being trapped by what he could see. Then, he felt a soft touch on his hand. Minna was standing right behind him. She didn't look at the mirrors. She didn't care about the lights. "They are using the light to blind you," she whispered. "If you try to see them, you will fail. Close your eyes, Iron King. Trust the world you found in the dark." Hanbin took a deep breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the black silk cloth he had used during his training. Slowly, he tied it over his eyes. He heard the assassins laugh. He heard Dae-ho mock him, calling him a coward who couldn't face the end. but as the visual world vanished, the gallery changed. The spinning lights stopped being a distraction. Instead, Hanbin felt the heat of the lamps on his skin. The confusing echoes of Daeho's voice stopped being a maze. He began to listen for the one sound that a mirror couldn't copy, the weight of a person. He heard the squeak of a leather boot on the right. He heard the metallic slide of a gun safety being flicked off on the left. Most importantly, he heard the frantic, uneven heartbeat of Daeho, hidden behind a pillar 50 feet ahead. "I see you now, Daeho," Hanbin said, his voice calm and steady. He didn't move like a confused victim anymore. He moved like a ghost through the glass. He dodged a bullet because he heard the finger pull the trigger a split second before the flash. He stepped around a trap because he heard the thin wire humming in the air. By closing his eyes, he had become the most dangerous man in the room. The Iron King was no longer a prisoner of his sight. He was finally seeing the truth, and the truth was that his enemies were terrified of a man who didn't need to look at them to destroy them. The chaos in the mirror gallery ended as quickly as a lightning strike. When the smoke cleared and the lights were turned back to a soft, steady glow, Hanbin finally removed the black silk from his eyes. Daeho sat on the floor, surrounded by the shattered glass of his own decoys, his face pale with shock. He couldn't understand how a man who couldn't see had managed to outmaneuver a dozen armed soldiers. He looked at Hanbin, then at the quiet girl standing beside him, and he finally realized that the Iron King was no longer the man he used to be. The betrayal was over. Hanbin did not react with the loud, explosive rage he was known for in the past. Instead, he handled the situation with a cold, quiet precision. The traitors were removed from the city, and the web of lies they had built was torn down piece by piece. Hanbin spent the next few weeks cleaning his organization. He fired the guards who only looked for cameras and promoted the people who actually paid attention to the world around them. The black glass tower in Busan was still the center of his power, but it felt different now. The hundreds of glowing screens were dimmed, and the heavy curtains were often pulled back to let in the sound of the sea. Hanbin didn't spend his days staring at monitors anymore. He spent them sitting in his large office, often with his eyes closed, listening to the city. Beside him sat Mina. She was no longer a girl from the rain-soaked alleys, she was the hidden heart of the empire. Hanbin realized that her blindness had been a gift to him, a way to see through the fake smiles and practiced speeches of the underworld. Whenever a new business partner arrived, Mina would sit in the shadows, listening to the rhythm of their words and the speed of their breath. If she felt a hitch in their heart, Hanbin knew to be careful. "The city sounds different today," Hanbin remarked one afternoon, looking out toward the harbor. "It sounds honest," Mina replied with a small, peaceful smile. "People are no longer performing for your cameras. They know that even if you aren't watching, you are always listening." The Iron King had learned the greatest lesson of power, that the eyes can be tricked, but the truth always has its own sound. Together, Hanbin and Mina ruled the coast, not through fear and flashing lights, but through a deep, quiet understanding of the world. The man who saw everything and the girl who heard everything had become an unstoppable force. In the shadows of Busan, the silence was no longer a threat, it was their greatest weapon.